Hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Fielka. Today is January 29, 2023. We want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast. I'm probably wrong about everything. And a special thanks to my big sister, Janice Fielka, and her husband, Rich Feldman, for introducing me to today's guest, Peter Werbe. Is that the way you pronounce the last name?
Absolutely. Unless you're German, and then you would say Werbe. But
Werbe.
but we'll go with
Peter
Werbe. We'll go with Werbe.
Werbe.
Yeah.
And Peter, where in the heck you calling in from?
Well, gee, I just look at the title on the screen there, Jerry, in Venice, and I go, ooh, I'm here in chilly Detroit, just a mile or so from your sister Janice and your brother-in-law Rich, good friends of mine.
Super cool. I really appreciate this, Peter. The first question is, what is the best thing for a human being?
Oh my God. I thought you were, oh, wow. So I got to think about the best thing is peace. To be,
Oh, that is a great
to be,
word.
I know that sounds, without explanation, maybe, wow, man, dude, guys. But yeah, uh, a peaceful person in a peaceful community in a peaceful world. That's what we
Yeah.
all strive for. And there's not much of it these days on any level.
Well, we're going to have it right here. That's a great word to start off with. I usually don't get that word. The second question, Peter, is what's your favorite form of information, how it comes into you?
Well, how it's actually there's two answers. How I get 99% of my information is through the internet. It's not my favorite. I used to like to just sit in front of a roaring fire during the winter and read the New York Times or books or magazines. But now this infernal machine, which is both giveth and taketh, with you and me being able to communicate and with your audience, that's a give. And the idea that I'm just sitting in front of a screen, I don't know how many hours a day, is certainly a take.
Yeah. It's funny. Someone told me the other day that their dad was a home movie taker. And I was like, taker? That's a funny word. But let's divert on reading for a second, Peter. Did you become a reader more because your parents told you to read? They did it as an example or on your own?
No, it was actually all my parents. They were very much into reading and read to me when I was a kid, and then I have early memories of reading books. Reading Sherlock Holmes with it scared me so badly that when my tall mother, who then I realized was never got more than 5 feet, I would sit outside huddled against the bathroom door while she was in the bathroom, you know, because I was so frightened by the Sherlock Holmes story. So yeah, no, I've been reading all my life. The only if you talk if how about I don't know, maybe I hope I'm anticipating a question, but what do I regret? One of the things I regret is that I never made a list of all the books that I've read throughout my life.
Yeah. No, that's a great thing. List of all books. Yeah. That's funny. You didn't anticipate that question, and it should be on my, I've collected over 200 questions. We'll get through maybe 30, but do you have any regrets is a really good question. But that was good. What this series really about is, Peter, is inventing new questions and new metaphors. So
Okay.
the along with information, the question goes, why do you think humans collect or gather information?
Well, I guess if I can extrapolate from myself, we want to know about the world in which we live. The
Yeah.
curious people do. I don't get the feeling that everyone does, particularly in the modern age. People mostly just want to accept entertainment.
Yeah.
I'm interested in knowledge. I'm interested in knowledge about myself. I'm interested in knowledge about you since I'm talking to you, and I'm interested about people in my neighborhood, the world, and what makes it tick, which is
Beautiful.
I've been alive quite a long time, and I don't know if I've come to definitive answers.
Yeah. Um, Do you think this need or want to collect information is more innate or more invented by humans?
I don't know. That's difficult. I would. What do you think? I would. I. This is great, Jerry. I didn't anticipate any questions like this, and yeah, this. Usually, since I've done a lot of interviews about my book, Summer on Fire. I tell you the truth. You can't say different things every time, so I have a lot of rote answers. So
Yeah.
this is making me think. I appreciate this. I think that there must be an innate quality to it, don't you think? Because early humans, they had to understand pretty fully what was going on around them. Life was pretty precarious, and if they didn't get a good understanding of what was going on, they were out of there.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm glad you could flip them on me. I usually go, what, after 40 years of doing this, what people usually say it's innate because it's to survive.
Sure.
But there's variations on it. Do thoughts create emotions?
Oh, that's a question. Do thoughts create? Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
They do. I mean, in some ways, the information and the thoughts that the information, then thoughts, then emotions. I'd have to say a lot of it in the modern world for me is fear and anger. I don't mean that I'm trembling with fear all the time, but when you read headlines about the what is the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists moving the clock up to midnight when nuclear war would begin because of the confrontation now in Eastern Europe. Yeah, there's information, there's a thought about it, and what other response? I mean, there should be something else then after fear, and that should be action. So
Hello.
how do we
That's
move? Yeah,
yeah.
but I don't know how we move. I guess in some ways I don't feel like I have the social or personal power I had during the period when there were mass movements. So
No.
now, you know, just uh, kind of daunting what we're facing.
Yeah. Fill in the blank, Peter. I don't know what I think until I
Huh. I don't know what I think until probably I read about it.
yeah,
Way back when, I can't believe it's this far ago, but say 60 years ago, when my wife Marilyn and we would read current events in the daily newspaper or watch our little black and white television, say back in well, let's put it back a year, 61 years ago, when we were reading in the daily papers and hearing the television news about the Cuban Missile Crisis. And we knew, we just didn't trust the mainstream sources, and we would wait for a newspaper called the National Guardian, which was a left-wing newspaper.
yeah,
And people could say, "Well, how do you know that's telling the truth?" You get at some point you got to give confidence to something, whether it's the New York Times or the National Review or the National Guardian. And so we waited with bated breath to be able to understand what was going on in this confrontation between the Soviet Union and the United States before we made a decision or what we were going to do, or in a way, what thoughts we were going to have and what emotions we were going to have, and then what actions we were going to take.
yeah. It's really good, Peter, because the question's rooted in McLuhan says, I don't know what I think until I say it. And Joan Didion said, I don't know what I think until I write it.
Huh.
I am more like you. I'm like, I don't know what I think until I read someone else's what they think. But reading is a beautiful activity. Can humans think without language?
Well, let me just go back one thing. One of the things that I've said recently was there's I don't know, I'm sure you remember the Leonard Skinner band. Well,
Yeah.
they have by now, after you live for a while, and maybe maybe even if you're very young and very intuitive, but the Leonard Skinner has a song that called "I Know a Little," and the kicker line is "I know a little and I can guess the rest."
Wow.
So increasingly, I don't have to wait for the National Guardian. I can make sense of things because of prior knowledge, because of
Yep.
can we have thought without language? You'd have to ask Noam Chomsky about that. I don't know. What do you think? Can you have thoughts without
Well,
language?
can humans think without language? Almost 90% of people say yes. But it's funny because you have
Really?
ES. Yeah, well, but it's funny because you have ESP because you anticipated the next question because the first thing I do is quote Chomsky. But
Okay.
before I do that, I want to tell you, quoting Leonard Skinner, because it's like, those dudes had a Confederate flag
I
behind
know. Not
their
my
their
favorite.
rock video, and Mary, the black backup singers are like, what the? But this is a good line. I'm glad you isolated that for me because I know a little and I can guess the rest
Yeah.
is pattern recognizing. You've
Okay. Yeah.
developed the skill of pattern recognition, which leads to comprehensive awareness, where you get the big picture. So you read the New York Times, you can read the John Birch Society newsletter, and you can read the National Guardian. Then you can get a big picture, and then you decide what you gravitate towards. Because
Sure.
if you don't hear, but here's the Chomsky line: a language is not just words; it's culture, a tradition, a unification of community, a whole history that creates what a community is. What do
Hmm.
you do when language doesn't work? When language breaks down, what do you do?
Oh, is that his question or your question or
No,
both?
that's my question. The first part was a
Okay.
quote.
All right.
And then,
Let me just defend Leonard Skinner to defend myself. I was my part of my professional work. I did what you did. I was a talk show host, but I was also a rock and roll DJ, and so
right.
we would play those tunes. Yeah. No. If I had and we had playlists. If we
Yeah.
had freeform radio, in other words, if the announcer, the DJ, got
Yeah.
to pick it, you wouldn't hear any Leonard Skinner on my show. But I like that.
But
And
it's also, Peter, to interrupt, it's you probably, me and you both have the ability to separate the art from the artist.
yeah, I don't know. I mean, when someone I can't listen to Ted Nugent or Kid Rock or people like that just because of they have
But wait
such
a minute,
awful politics.
did you listen to Ted pre him going on his rant?
Yeah,
Did you listen?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
sure.
So you could, if you can still listen to Journey to the Center of Your Mind and go, wow, that's a cool song that
Mm,
I grew up on, and I'm not going to abandon it, or you can. It's the choice. But I know
yeah.
what you mean. I know what you're saying, and it's important for us to think about it. Yeah.
I'm partly dodging the last question. I don't think I have a good answer. So
Well, what do you? No,
can we go
you're
on to another one?
Well, no, but you're at the grocery store and you're talking to someone and there's some communication breakdown. You're on the line at a picket line and there's some communication breakdown. What do you usually do? I mean, what's your strategy when there's language isn't working?
Well, I always try to be a calm center. One of the
There you
things
go.
because things always escalate in tone, particularly, and people get angry. It used to be only men, and it still is predominantly men that manifest anger. But women I mean, one of the drawbacks to this is an odd thing to say to equity for women in this society is that they've less adopted the basic tenets of feminism and instead integrated themselves into this society with all of its macho definitions. So, but
Yeah.
usually it's men that are that. I was just talking to a guy the other day, a contractor, and he said, "So you're calling me a liar?" And I said, "I'm sorry, Jim." I said, "We have to end this call." I said, "This is because I saw it was good. As soon as someone
Yeah.
gets to that point, we know
Yeah.
it's going to go nowhere." I mean, he was lying, as a matter of
Yeah.
fact.
But
But
that's your
yeah,
calm center. You had the brains to go, okay, we're going to end the call. So,
yeah,
that's that you answered the question. So, your observations, Peter, of humans in general, I know it's stupid and it's both, but just your thought, your prompt. It's just a prompt for your thought. Are we more thinking beings or more feeling beings?
Well, oh, definitely feeling, unfortunately. I think it worked, in the early stages of humanity, 50,000 years ago. Now it allows just whole sections of populations to be made crazy
Yeah.
through their feelings. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of things that worked in uh, in early humans that aren't necessary now,
Yeah.
um, but that are remnants. For instance, you know the theory that there's a God gene, uh,
God?
God. Yeah.
Oh, no, I don't know about that.
Okay. Well, there's a cultural anthropologist that said it's very possible that there. I mean, since that spiritual religious qualities, or I don't know if that's the right now, is universal across the world. So, I mean, everybody has an explanation of who we are, why we are, where passages of life and what happens to us after we die, and that could have been very, very important for early human beings. Now, now in the last 1,000 or 2,000 years, it's just been another one of the bloody swords religion of of civilization. Was that clear? What I meant
No, no,
was,
no, no,
yeah.
that's clear. I can understand what they're I like the cultural anthropologists are important to me. I like what you just said. But actually you're anticipating a lot we're going to go into. Let's move on. The next two questions are from Alan Turing in 1950s. First
Oh,
one, is thinking a function of the soul?
I don't think there is a soul. So,
The second Turing question is, can machines think?
well, we've sure. Well, it depends on what you mean by thinking. We've seen with this new AI what's going on. I figured out, a friend of mine who's very into this all started sending me this stuff. And I thought, I've worked almost exclusively on radio for half a century. I've the whole time was involved in print media, the Fifth Estate newspaper, and now magazine. I've written a novel, and I thought, that print will do me for the rest of my life. I'm not even going to look at any of this AI, artificial intelligence stuff. And people go, "Oh, well, he's an old fogey."
Yeah,
Yes, yeah, I'll cop to that.
that's fine. Do you more pursue happiness or more pursue meaning?
Well, isn't probably the answer obvious that they're intertwined? I mean, you can be happy just by watching uh, you know, watching a show on television or watching your grandkids or well, but then too, that's meaning. I mean, if you have, I don't have grandchildren, by the way. I don't have any children, but I see that in people, so that both has meaning and brings great joy usually, and meaning in life. Yeah, I, I I don't know why I'm hesitating. Because I don't want to sound arrogant, but I think because of what I've thought all my life and the people that I have had the fortune to be around, and sometimes the privilege, that I did figure out a lot of the meaning for me of life. Isn't there isn't that a Monty Python movie, The Meaning of Life?
It's also the meaning of life. It's also a T.S. Eliot quote, had the experience but missed the meaning. But it's important. I got it from Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, is that happiness doesn't necessarily last and meaning can last. But that was good. Does the brain more detect consciousness or create consciousness? Like, is consciousness there bubbling away and we're detecting it, or are we creating consciousness?
Wow, who have you interviewed in the past that can answer this? I don't
Well,
know,
that's
Jerry.
just, it's more like, Peter, your hunch. You don't have to
Yeah,
be a neuroscientist. It's just
yeah.
your hunch.
I don't go on hunches. No.
Yeah.
Uh, um,
But you don't have to. You can say pass or I don't know. That's those
Pass.
are two valid.
Okay,
Yeah,
pass.
that's yeah.
Pass.
Audre Lorde, the poet, said you can't dismantle the master's house using the
The
master.
master's tools.
Yvonne
Well,
Rainer. Well,
yeah.
let me finish the question.
Sorry.
Yvonne Rainer said you can if you expose the tools. What new tool do you suggest? What?
Well, I don't know. See, if you think about the people that have wanted to change the world, which essentially has meant in the modern era, I'd say the last 400 years, has been the political state and the political economy that accompanies it. And in the modern era, the last few hundred years, it's been the utopian thrust has been to abolish capitalism and to set forth a community of people, workers that live in harmony without exploitation of the capitalist class. Uh, there's a lot of that could be an hour and a half discussion. But in terms of Lord's formulation there, if so, that would be voting. That would be the desire for reform within capitalism, and a lot of people historically and currently would agree with that.
Yeah.
That reform extends and affirms the system that we have. I mean, if you make enough noise, you get let in, somewhat.
Yeah.
So there, women have gotten in, gays have gotten in, people of color have gotten in. All of them, obviously, not totally or completely or without a lot of harm being done to their efforts to do so. Labor, that's all been reformed. But we know still there are classes, the 1%, or what the old movement used to call the ruling class, which I like actually, because that is them. They're worth a few trillion, particularly worldwide, and yet there's massive poverty throughout the world. So, I mean, I think about this is my little trick, because I don't know when we're going to get to it, but actually, I forgot my trick. Go ahead. It'll come back.
It's good. I love the word trick. I'm all about. I love the compassionate trickster, the coyote.
You got to remember. You got to remember your tricks, though. Go ahead.
Don't worry, Peter.
I'm
a
not.
lot of the stuff comes back around. It's a beautiful thing.
Does.
What do you worry about when you go to bed at night?
Oh, what do I worry about when I go to bed? Some of it is a little private, and so I won't relate that. The worries I have aren't great. I work for a publication called The Fifth Estate, which you can go to fifthestate.org and check that out. And I'm worrying, is this writer going to get his or her article or review in?
Yeah.
Are we going to be able to resolve? I'm just talking currently now because we're working on an issue. Are we going to be able to resolve a couple of disputes between the editors, because we have a collective editorial board? What else? How come my handball game isn't better?
That is good. You're a practical human, man. You're both personal and politically. Okay, let's move on. This is McLuhan learned from a poet that artists are the antenna of the race. And my artists, I mean radio people, journalists, painters, poets. Artists are antenna of the race. They're broadcasting and detecting the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, so that we might be able to learn to cope with what we don't like about the inventions. I ask you the question Marshall probed his whole career. Why do we ignore the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, even though the artists are broadcasting them to us?
Well, I don't know, maybe a superficiality. I certainly haven't. I mean, I did my whole career in radio as a public person and on a very popular radio station. So I have great name recognition in the city of Detroit. And I never made much of it. I never hung out with radio people. They're all friends. They're all good friends and all that. But I never was an industry guy. I had my own group of friends politically around the Fifth Estate, in the Cass Corridor area of Detroit, where there was a lot of music going on and what have you, and a lot of local community stuff. So I'm always a little surprised. For instance, a few days ago there was National DJ Week, and I noticed a lot of my colleagues. I've been retired since 2016, so people that had been my colleagues, and they were all listing all the radio stations they'd been part of in Detroit. So I thought, oh, I'll do that too. And suddenly, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people on Facebook gave it likes, and people just said that you were so important to me. And I was almost embarrassed. I didn't realize I was just doing what I thought one should do in the world.
Yeah.
That cliche of speak truth to power, or just speak truth,
Uh,
and help people figure out things. Because the people I was broadcasting to very frequently are people that had no political experience whatsoever. And I would get often people saying to me, I've never heard anything like that before. That wouldn't be true with you, Jerry. If I started telling you things, you'd probably go, yeah, yeah. And you would add to it because we have a lot of the same sources, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And so I realized that when I would open my mouth publicly, and I guess I'm doing that now as well, but the audience I had, a lot of it were just young working class guys and this was a talk show on a rock and roll station. So they were, they were listening to AC/DC and I don't know, who else, Leonard Skinner, as we were talking early. And then all of a sudden, here I am talking about, war and race and police brutality and Wilhelm Reich and, stuff like that. So it introduced a lot of people. Here was my trick. Yeah. So that was it. So that one of the things that got me to read, where is it? So here, yeah. My book, Summer on Fire, is people usually one of the questions I get asked about the book is, why did you write it? And as it turned out, I think the biggest audience could have been people that either lived through that era, which was quite a while ago, 1967, or knew about it quite well, or consider it a lodestone culturally. And the big riot in Detroit in 1967 still is a landmark date in the city. But I wanted it to be a literary statement of everything I'd ever talked about on that radio show for almost half a century.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's like many people, like Lou Reed wanted to turn Edgar Allan Poe into rock and roll. You wanted to turn rock and roll radio DJing into a book.
Yeah, I guess so.
And you did it. That's beautiful. Yeah. Do artists have moral obligation?
Well, it depends on a personal philosophy. Being an atheist, what do you do then in a world where potentially then people say everything is permissible? If there's "thou shalt not kill" and you don't believe in those, the book from which those commandments appear, what's to stop you from morally or ethically committing homicide? It's pretty easy. I took these real involved courses in college on existentialism. It's about universal choice. But it really turns out to be the golden rule, right? Do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. So that's the same thing as universal choice. So it depends on whether, what you adopt. People go through life being very amoral. I try to live in terms of the values that I espouse. I mean, I know everybody says that, but
well, no, this is good what you said, because it's again leading into the following questions. Next one is, are you more afraid of new ideas or more afraid of old ideas?
Oh, I'm afraid. Well, I'm definitely not afraid of old ideas at all. I mean, well, it depends on what you mean. I mean, a lot of the older, quote, old ideas are ones that I adhere to, that are somewhat the bedrock of my personal philosophy and beliefs. And new beliefs, I don't even know what new beliefs are. I mean, I haven't heard one recently that's interested me. Mostly they seem to be revolving around cyberspace, which have no interest to me. Well, I guess those do frighten me a little. I mean, all you have to do is watch a few of the Terminator movie series, and as soon as I started hearing what's this new program that writes stuff and all that
Chat
AI.
GPT.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So all I started thinking was Terminator. You ever see those movies with Arnold
I
Schwarzenegger?
know about, I know what you're talking about. Definitely. Yeah.
They're
So
good movies.
yeah,
They're
no,
they're good. They're cautionary tales, to be
yeah.
sure. Yeah.
Can you conjure up your earliest memory ever or one of them?
Um, hmm. By just about 12 just flashed through my brain, but I was trying to get back when, something say before 5. Uh, huh. No, not too well. I've always had memory problems, not recall so much.
Right.
And if you want to know the dates of the English Civil War or something like that, I can tell you. But I, uh, if when I wrote my book Summer on Fire, someone said, "Why don't you write a memoir?" I said, "There's no way in the world I could remember people or dates or places or
Yeah.
what followed what." And I was thinking in Detroit, which I know you know, the Grande Ballroom, which was one of those ballrooms like the Fillmore out in San Francisco, where every classic rock great imaginable played. And my wife and I went there almost every Friday and Saturday sometimes.
Yep.
I mean, usually very stoned, so that could be part of it. But if you said to me, Peter, I want you honestly to name 6 bands that you remember that you really saw, I would be hard pressed. And
Yeah.
that actually makes me sad because I had the experience at the moment, but it would be good 50 something years later to say, yeah, I can tell you, I sat, you know, 20 feet away from B.B. King or The Who
Yeah.
or Led Zeppelin.
Well, dude, you got the MC5 on your website. That's enough. And
Oh, well,
you can watch the Grande Ballroom documentary and it'll help fill in the blanks. But is memory more a curse or more a blessing?
oh, I think it's a blessing, and I feel somewhat cheated that my memory and memories aren't stronger.
Peter, tell me someone within your immediate family,
Yeah.
then outside your immediate family, just briefly, who had an impact on you, kind of like a role model. And what specifically was that impact?
Uh, there's a friend of mine that teaches in a Tennessee State University, and it's required for the beginning English classes. They have to, the students have to write a paper on the 2 people that influenced them the most, and overwhelmingly they get. Can you guess the 2 people?
Their mom and their dad.
Well, you're half right with Dad.
Their
Tennessee, Tennessee. We're talking Tennessee here.
their
Apologies.
dad. I can't guess the other one. Their dad.
Jesus,
Oh,
Jesus.
Jesus and dad. That's amazing. Jesus. Now we're dropping names, man.
Yeah,
Jesus.
yeah, yeah.
So for
Well,
you,
I
just
would,
briefly,
I
who
would,
who is
I would go with my dad.
what'd you
And
get? What did you get mainly from your dad? Just briefly.
this, this reason. I mean, for one thing, there's dedication to family, and there's
Yeah.
just my wife and I. But I've been married almost 60 years. In fact, 60 years this year. Um,
Bravo, dude.
yeah.
60 years. Dedication to family. Now, what did you get from someone outside your family? One major thing you got.
Well,
And
this was a friend that passed away a few years ago at 94. His name was Federico Arcos, and he was a Spaniard, but he emigrated after the Spanish Civil War and Revolution. That ended in 1939. He came here barely getting out alive because he was doing guerrilla warfare against the fascist dictator Franco's regime that was killing all of the dictator's opponents. And he came here. He fought in these anarchist militias against the fascists when he was 16, beginning when he was 16. And he had this joy in his life, although he had seen so many of his friends killed, some of them garroted, strangled with a wire, which was a way of execution in Spain under the Franco regime. But he was also dedicated to the maintenance of memory of that era and of the few years in which people made utopia real within the districts in which the anarchists had their utopian society. And he was joyful, he was dedicated, and he was an inspiration, and carried with him the old ideas, to which, and in fact, he called. I don't actually, it's odd. I don't know how to say this. He talked about the ideal. That was the other thing too, is that he was committed to the ideal, which was an anarchist society. And people, anarchists, throwing bombs or the people rioting in the street. I mean, that's not what he was all about. He was an extraordinarily disciplined person. And I would consider myself pretty disciplined too for an anarchist.
Yeah. This is really good. We're going to get into political activism soon. The next question, Peter, is do evil people exist, or does evil use people as a vehicle?
We mean exist? Well, I don't know. It goes both ways, doesn't it? Why are people attracted to evil? Why do people get attracted to hurting people? Why do people get attracted to having power over other people? Those answers came to me. Oh, I missed somebody else, and he's very prominent. This is what I learned to do in my book, Summer on Fire, that I bring into a character that is modeled on a professor that I had at Michigan State University that introduced me to the works of Wilhelm Reich, a radical psychoanalyst who was a student of Freud's but was disowned by Freud because Reich rejected the Thanatos theory and was all about he thought authoritarian personalities were created by sexual repression. I know I'm sure you know all this. But my professor Roger W. Westcott, who appears in Summer on Fire under a different name, this was the idea. This was the time when these ideas, just as we used to say back then, blew my mind, because all of a sudden it answered everything. Why I felt so uncomfortable in this society. Why I hated teachers, or most of them, that were so authoritarian. Why I rebelled even against the authority of my father, who wasn't a real disciplinarian. And it gave an intellectual rationale that I wasn't a problem child, that I didn't need counseling, that it was an affirmation of all the rebellious feelings that I had against authority.
It was an affirmation that you were developing critical thinking skills, that you were seeing the bigger picture.
Yeah.
So the hidden question to the last really is, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? Peter, I set this up with a few modern thinkers. Alan Watts says, if you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. Coppola, Detroit dude, stole from the mob and the samurais. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. JFK said, forgive your enemy, but don't forget their name. And Fellini says, I need an enemy. So it's a lot of thoughts. The basic question, Peter, is how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? But first, how would you respond to Alan Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
Well, it depends. The nature of the threat. If it's as I said earlier, it's a contractor, and you realize that the conversation is going south, you say, I'm ending this conversation. Can you say goodbye? It was the last of what I said. And he just hung up on me. Yeah. But what do you do if if it's 1933 and you're in Ukraine in a Jewish settlement?
Yeah.
So it depends on the nature of the threat. I've been taking Tai Chi for the last it's 30 years or so.
Yeah.
So that influences me a lot, and it has to do with diffusing emotional and sometimes physical situations. If you don't
Yeah.
become the other person, you have a lot greater chance of, for instance, conflict not even occurring. But I'm trying to see if I can get this little mantra is that I say that if somebody threatened me physically, and they have, it's a very odd thing to do. Someone says, I'm gonna kick your ass. I turn on my heel and walk away without
Yeah.
saying anything.
Yeah.
And no, I would say 9,900 times out, 99 out of 100 times, no one's going to jump on your back. So I would do this. Let me see if I can get this together. Walk, run, tai chi, karate, shoot.
That is so good. You covered the waterfront there, dude. Karate is so good too because it took a 18-year-old kid taught me a couple years ago. He says in judo and jujitsu, what you learn is the great warriors don't even let the fight happen.
Right, right, right.
So
Well,
that
and
that
that
was
scares that scares people when you talk
yeah,
about shoot. But again, think of that we'll go back to the Eastern European experience of Jews during the 30s and the
yeah,
40s. And most people were incapable. Most Jews were incapable of resistance because the superior military forces came into an urban area and rounded everybody up. But the people that we have great admiration for were the Jewish partisans that took up arms to resist this Holocaust.
yeah,
And I want to emphasize again, I'm not criticizing. Sometimes people criticize, say, oh, they just went passively to their death. Right now, if 100 men with guns came down my street here and started rounding everybody up, you know,
yeah.
what Tai Chi or running wouldn't do much good.
Well, the beautiful thing, Peter, in your answer was that you said it's the nature of the threat that's important, but then you got into some real strategies, and I appreciate that. And Nassim Taleb says an interesting thing. He says games were created to give non-heroes the illusion of winning. In real life, you don't know who really wins or who really loses, but you can tell who a hero is. When I told that to someone, they said, villains don't think they're bad. They want control. Heroes want freedom. And
Yeah,
Gregory Bateson, the anthropologist, says, when the criminal gets caught, does he go, oh dear, I did something morally or socially wrong? Or does he go, whoops, my criminal skills weren't up to snuff that day.
exactly.
So that you can go off on any thoughts on those, but the basic question is, does punishment work?
Well, yeah, yes and no. I mean, it depends. I mean, I think most people would drive a lot faster than they do, for instance, if it wasn't for the fear of penalty. And most crimes of passion, murder and what have you, that's been not affected by that. And we have there is a book I read in college. It's a famous book, The Urge to Punish. Is
Yeah,
that I think that's a famous book, is it? You ever
yeah,
hear of it?
yeah,
And again, that comes a lot out of authoritarian personalities, and we see it acting out as we just did in this horrible beating that this young man in Memphis, Tennessee,
yeah,
experienced. And there's police units like that all over the country in every big major force. And here in Detroit, there was a couple of them historically called the Big Four. I won't even go into one called Stress that killed about 13 people. The Tactical Mobile Unit, and crime. How's crime generated? Crime is generated from the crimes at the top, the 1%, and it's acted out at the bottom by people disobeying essentially the property rules. But we know that poverty worldwide, ethnic, race, whatever, has no bearing. But in poverty neighborhoods, there's crime, violence, child abuse, abuse of women, drugs, everything that we try to get our head around. Why are they like that? And that they could be any particular group. In this group, white people usually attach that they to people of African descent because they are disproportionately poor and they act out the script of poverty. Does punishment work? No, because even with the street punishments and the official judicial punishments that we see in this country, we have the largest prison population, period, or at least per capita, maybe even period.
Yeah, it's the prison industrial complex.
Sure.
So, James Joyce was the first projectionist in Dublin 100 years ago. He basically checked out. He says, why should I go inside a building and see a movie of a tree when I can go outside and see a real tree? Years later, Faulkner said, sometimes the best fiction is more true than journalism. Why do we have to recreate things in order to get them? Why do we have to go to a theatrical play and see people act out life? Why don't we just live life?
Well, that's an interesting conundrum. I mean, there's a friend of mine, his name is John Zirzan, who is an anti-civilization philosopher, and his whole thing is opposing representation, including things like language, that
Yeah.
and paintings and what have you. Well, we're inside of these boxes, and it's fortunate that we are living in Detroit in this cold weather. But I can look around here, and I would take my camera and give you a tour, but I'm not sure I could get it back. And there's paintings and photographs of paintings by friends and photographs that mean a lot to me, and those representations are important. And part of it, of course, is that literature and films and plays bring you to situations where you can't possibly go, and also sometimes are displaying events and emotions where you wouldn't want to be.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Well, that's interesting because you've talked a lot about your book on podcast, and we can get into it. But I'm curious, the tipping point for you when you really said, I'm going to pursue being a political activist. Was it an event, a human being? You talk about your professor teaching you about Wilhelm Reich, but I mean, you've been a dedicated political activist for many years, especially through journalism,
Mm-hmm.
through
Well,
being a show host. What were the tipping points like to go into radio and to go into the Fifth Estate? What were the tipping points?
well, it was they're all pretty connected. In my actually, I would call him my mentor, Roger W. Westcott, and I relate this in Summer on Fire in a fictional way. Is that Roger, who became a good friend, strode into class in 1960 and announced that Negro students were sitting in at a Woolworths in North Carolina. And he said that there's a support picket line. He said, all races stay here. All people that believe in freedom come with me. And he strode out, followed
Wow.
by absolutely no one, including me, because it's hard to walk when your mouth is hanging wide open. And I can't remember the exact mechanics of it, but then just by the example of the freedom fighters in the South, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, Martin Luther King Jr., and all these people, their heroism and their dedication in the face of violent racism, I mean, it made me angry. It occurred to me, when I was a kid growing up, I'm 82 years old, so I was kind of conscious of stuff in the late 40s and early 50s, and I always heard a lot of racism, and I thought, and the overall view by white people of black people was that they were inferior.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself as a very young kid, so why aren't they treated better? You know what I mean? I mean, if
Right.
they
The
had,
logic would be we would be treating him better.
yeah, I said, what is going on? And well, then when I began to understand what was really going on, and that I'll tell you, I have been steeped in in the history of the African experience in the Americas, and I never failed to learn more stuff just about how grotesque the history of the treatment of black people in this country is, and how anybody can say, America number one, number one. We got a lot of fixing to do and a lot to make up for before we get out of number 103 or something like
Yeah.
that.
So then, Peter, that was really good. So where was the tipping point to pursue radio, specifically in the newspaper, especially the underground newspaper? Like, did you first write for the regular newspapers and then
No,
switch? Yeah.
no, I don't. I never. That's interesting. I never really wrote. I mean, I wrote papers in college, but I was part of the anti-war movement. I was also offended, and we very early on began anti-war activities as early as 1964. And by 1965, we had the Detroit Committee to End the War in Vietnam, when most people didn't even know what the hell Vietnam was or how many troops we had over there. And the founder of the Fifth Estate, Harvey Obshinsky, a Detroiter, had begun a paper which I had saw one time before, and he walked into a meeting of our anti-war group and said, "I don't have any staff. If this doesn't, if I don't get any, paper's going to go out of existence. Is there anybody here that wanted to help?" There was about 30 people at the meeting, and my wife and I said, "We will," and the rest, what did we say? The rest is hysteria. As we
but it is, Peter, you grew up reading New York Times all the time. Was that your big thing? Like one of
not
your rituals?
not no, I would Times. I'm that pretty much later. I mostly read radical, weekly publications for most of
Before
my
that,
time.
even like I.F. Stone?
I have Stone's Weekly, yeah, things,
Yeah.
publications, the National Guardian, some of the papers from the political parties that small socialist and communist parties. That I didn't think much of the groups, but I often found their stuff. I mean, I saw the flaws. They were more than willing to always tell the truth about the United States and its machinations, but they were a little soft on what the Soviet Union was doing, or
Yeah.
what Mao and the Chinese communists were doing. And I thought, it's just more bosses. As soon as somebody's got a poster up on the wall of them, something's wrong.
Yeah. But let's go divert tangent for a second, because I.F. Stone has the great line I love. The truth as I see it. And I really
Yeah.
love I.F. Stone. And this word truth, I've explored a lot. Louis Buñuel, the filmmaker, says, "I'm for anyone who seeks the truth,
Mhm.
but I part ways when they claim they found it." Now, 80%, 90% of people go, "That's good. I like that." And one guy finally said, "Dude, that's bullshit. If I'm going to
Okay.
seek something, it's because I want to find it."
Right, right, right.
And Louis Buñuel's a satirist, so it's a deeper level, but it is again a prompt or a jumping off point. So the cliche goes, the journey's more important than the destination.
Yeah.
Why do we have to seek or name a destination if the journey's more important?
Well, Buñuel, what did he say also? Thank God I'm an atheist.
Dude, you predicted a quote I'm going to use later on. That's
Oh,
very
sorry.
no, don't be sorry. Again, that's the beauty of ESP.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you,
Yeah, go ahead.
having people, having asked people questions all my professional life as a talk show host, but getting asked questions, and that's people, my audience, on the talk show would ask me questions as well.
Yeah,
And the only one that really stumped me was, how do I know what to believe, or how do I know what
yeah,
is the truth?
good.
And I don't, and as when I was asked that, I would probably right now dance around it so I don't sound like someone who
Yeah,
hasn't considered it. But it's difficult. It's almost, it's
Yeah.
almost an emotion.
Yeah.
If you think somebody like Donald Trump is telling the truth, I think that says a lot about your emotions.
About you.
And I think if you think, I don't know who do we
Yeah.
think, who's a political figure on the left? If you think Noam Chomsky is
Yeah.
telling the truth, that says something about your emotions.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, and that was Wilhelm Reich's deal, is that your psycho, your psyche is what generates everything, including your emotions, including your beliefs, right?
That's Peter, what you're touching on is what's called gut. And
Yeah.
it's funny because my friend says the three T's in music are theory, technique, and taste. So when
Huh.
I talk to musicians, I go, how do you determine taste? How do you acquire taste? Why do you play this group and not that group on your radio show
Yeah.
if it's your choice? And this is the same thing. How do you determine truth? By your gut, which is, something inside, but it's also your intellect. So it's a combination of both. So I'm curious, let's get right down to it on in the political activist world. Oh, before we go into politics, I wonder what kicked you over into radio?
Oh,
I
well,
mean, you
we
did
was
that. What's your tipping point there? Because you really explained that well. You just go, we'll help.
yeah. Well, and it was almost the same. I mean, I don't know how people used to get hired into radio before me. And then I began doing radio in 1970. And after, it was all through broadcast schools and communications departments in colleges. But the Fifth Estate, let me back up. There was a radio station in Detroit that became WRIF, and it decided that even though it was playing rock and roll, no one took it serious. Everybody was listening to a station called WABX that was
Yeah.
the single hippest station ever. And so this seeing program director at WRIF said, I got to get some of those really cool hip guys that are tuned in to the audience we want to have. So they took a whole bunch of us in to do shows, to at least five of us from the Fifth Estate staff. And I'm cutting the story short somewhat. And I wound up doing an interview show just like you're doing without callers. But after a couple of years, it was an ABC owned and operated station. So they needed to have all this community service, and they wanted a full time overnight talk show, which went on
Wow.
from, I'm even forgetting, I think 1972 to 1976. So I got all, you could tell when people were getting home from the bars at about 2:30, 3 o'clock. You sound like a communist to me. And I'd say, really? I'm much more radical than that. That always stopped them. Yeah.
Did you go over to DET then too? Did you go over to?
The public radio station, no. I did one
Oh,
time.
you
No,
were on RIF for 4 years. That was it.
I was,
Didn't you?
there was a hiatus. I mean, I was on all of the Detroit radio rock stations at one time or another.
You were on
And
ABX too?
I was on ABX, not in its heyday, in the late
Yeah.
70s, but then it paid adult wages to even people like me. I wasn't a big star, even
Yeah.
people knew me and everything like that, but I wasn't an Arthur Penhallow or anybody like that. And it was a union. WRF is a union station, so now I have a pension, and now people are on commercial radio. There are people during the day making $20 an hour with no benefits.
Yeah. Well, listen, Peter, I'll tell you, being a little white, skinny teenager in Flint, Michigan. I mean, that was life changing for me. But let's get into politics now. What's the difference between rights and responsibilities?
Man, rights and responsibilities. Well, uh, there are There are two different things. Rights are what you are granted through some agency or other. I mean, people talk about natural rights, the rights in the Constitution. They're seen as emanating from somewhere or other,
Yeah.
and are supposed to be sacrosanct. You know, you can't violate them if they're God's laws or man's laws. Responsibility, to me, that's what I have. I'm a white male that has extraordinary privilege in this world. Well, I don't feel guilty about this, but I think I have an obligation, or if you will, a responsibility to alter that equation so other people have the same rights, if you will, or privilege, let's say privileges. Well, then they aren't privileges, are they, if everyone has the same ones? But a responsibility, and there's a responsibility to the planet to be a good citizen of the planet. There's a responsibility, we were saying earlier, if you want peace, to be peace and not
Yeah.
take on the trappings of aggressiveness.
What's the difference between rebellion and revolution?
Well, a lot of those words are revolution means things are completely turned over. So, you have the American Revolution, the English, the Cuban, the Russian, the Chinese, and rebellions are usually uprisings. Some people called the Detroit riots of 1967 the Detroit Rebellion, that it was a population that rose up in anger over police brutality and poverty and repressive and oppressive conditions in general.
Really good, Peter. This is Utah Phillips.
Ah,
Anarchy is making rules for yourself, not others. Who's entitled to make the rules? Now, this is again a struggle for the wording, because I hate to say entitled in a way. If I say who makes the rules, then you're going to go in one direction. Who should make the rules is another, and who's entitled. So it's basically, we know who makes the rules now. We live in a plutocracy, but
sure.
it's more like who should make the rules. Like, and go into the anarchy thing a little, because you touched on that. You talked about anarchy earlier, and actually I talked to an anarchy specialist, and he goes, that's not correct what Utah Phillips says. Well, Utah Phillips is a funny folk singer, but he's also a labor activist.
Yeah.
And he said anarchy is making rules for yourself and not others. It's an amazing concept to think about that, to me, like, but your thoughts on this? Who should make
Well,
the
well, if you're familiar with the novel *The Dispossessed* by Ursula K. Le Guin,
yeah,
it's about the problems within an anarchist society sometime in the future that has all sorts of difficulties of people living together. And every society has rules. You have to have rules. Again, I'm going to make a rule for myself. Instead of 25 on my street, I'm going to go 75 because it's my
yeah,
rule. But it's somewhat, you can make any rule for yourself as long as it doesn't hurt anybody else, obviously. But the whole idea of an anarchist vision would be that hierarchies are dispersed and people make decisions about how they're going to live in a communal or collective way that benefits everybody that's involved. Not, I mean, a friend of mine got fired from a little small industrial shop because he he was putting up this big sign over the entrance. He got caught by the boss that said, "Abandon hope, all ye who enter." And that's the nature of work. You do what the boss says. The unions give some power to the collectivity of the workforce, but ultimately you have a boss, an owner,
yeah.
uh, someone who makes the rules, and so the rules have to be decided upon in a manner that benefits the collectivity. And if you go back again to early human beings, those societies all had they were pretty free. There weren't kings and what are they all chiefs that could say off with their heads and all that. That came about with society. And a lot of those early societies were matriarchal and matrilineal, well, matriarchal, let's say. And so if they had to make rules that worked, and if the rules didn't work, again, they're gone. I mean,
Yeah.
not from an external, well, from nature.
Yeah, Peter, you brought up a lot because I'm not really for cameras on cops. I think it's a good idea, but why don't we nurture a society where humans do humane things to each other? Because that's the humane thing to do, not
Right.
because there's a fucking cop camera on your. All you have to do is angle your camera and beat the shit out of police brutality. But it is also what Lenny Bruce taught me in saying there's three ways to call cops. You can call them cops, pigs, or peace officers. Well, why don't we just call them peace officers? Because that's William Blake. We become what we behold. We want them to be peace officers, and some are going to fail. So how do we nurture the society to not have war? I'm sorry to go on a rant, but it's like my hero is Maria Gimbutas, the anthropologist, who said, yeah, I can prove there were societies that had no violence. And it's like, yeah, right. The other anthropologists go, now, it's probably innate in humans to be violent or protect the people stealing their food or raping their family. But the question is this innate in humans actually the question should be this: how do we stop our governments from going to war?
Well, it seems to be in their DNA. I mean, since state societies arose 4,000 or 5,000 years ago, they've been constantly at war, and there's borders. I mean, how do we have our borders? Where did they come from? I was just reading about the St. Patrick's Battalion. These Irish deserters, hundreds of Irish deserters from the U.S. Army during the U.S. What was it, the Mexican-American War, who hundreds and hundreds of primarily Irish, but others that deserted and fought with the Mexican army. And the Mexican-American War, that's the U.S.'s Ukraine, right?
Yeah.
And it was all about gobble up more territory, more, and it's mostly, if you're a Marxist, which I'm not, it's all about the political economy, trying to enrich the ruling class, the 1%. But there's a psychopathology. There's a madness that has. I mean, the whole idea of wanting to rule people is quite mad in and of itself. I don't want to rule anybody. I got enough trouble taking care of myself. And being of aid and assistance to those around me who need it. In war,
the thing about the Vietnam War too is some of my deep political researchers said the anti-war movement didn't end the Vietnam War. Something else did, but it sure enough consolidated a community of important thinkers like us to carry on this fact that maybe we cannot have less war. And so then he eventually taught me, now we don't go to war with any big countries. We only go to war with puny countries.
Makes sense. That's what's the philosopher Pinker, what's his name?
Yeah, Steven Pinker.
He says things have gotten better. 450,000 Americans died in World War II, 60,000 in Vietnam, 5,000 in Iraq. Aren't things getting better?
Yeah, he's saying we're less violent. But here's another one, Peter. I really appreciate your time here. You're really teaching me a lot, and I appreciate it. And you're articulate. I appreciate this. John Basil Barnhill is a socialist. He said, where the people fear the government, you have tyranny. Where the government fears the people, you have liberty. In 2005, V for Vendetta, the movie, paraphrased it. They said, people should not be afraid of their governments. Governments should be afraid of their people. How do you personally handle false fears? Like, the war on drugs. Like, you can't have a war on drugs because drugs don't fight, and you can't say no to drugs because drugs don't talk. So we get these false fears: the war on drugs, the war on poverty. How do you personally handle
Oh, there's about 19 things you had embedded in there, but uh, yeah, I don't know when. You'd have to really show me when governments fear the people. They rarely
it?
do. You know, maybe to some extent, some of these authoritarian governments would, because, for instance, if you were in Iraq or Romania or Soviet Union, China, places like that, if you wrote a poem, they put you in jail. In fact, there's just this young teenager. It was on the front page of CNN news site today. This teenager, 19-year-old young woman, who wrote. Did she just write a criticism or was it a poem? Let's just at least a criticism, and she's facing years in jail. Where here, I can say, Jerry,
Yeah,
we've got to overthrow the government.
yeah.
Biden is a tyrant no less than Trump. We need anarchist revolution, and nothing. They don't even know I exist and couldn't
Well, they like
care
it.
less.
Peter, they actually like it because then they will say, "See, you live in the land
Yeah.
of the free." Right. Yeah, right. There is censorship, and it's just not extreme. They sort of cover it up. What's more important, Peter, conviction or compromise?
Well, nobody likes to compromise, and you know what? Um, it depends on where you are. Sometimes, or at least they used to, the Republicans and the Democrats would compromise on a legislative bill in order to get it passed. And usually, the people with the lesser votes would demand of the one with the group, the party with the greater votes, to take out something that they didn't like. But compromise, I mean, does anybody want to compromise their principles or compromise their beliefs? No, you only do that out of weakness, usually. I mean, it could be someone, you say, well, I don't want to eat till 9 o'clock. And someone says, I'm going to get heartburn if I do that. I really want to go to bed or go to eat at 6:30. I say, well, how about 7:15? I mean, those are little teeny compromises we make every day, but aren't important. Political compromises and the people that have made political compromises over the centuries usually aren't too pretty, and often aren't very admirable, but oftentimes do so because they have little or no choice.
Here's a couple questions from a great film called Problema. It's 2010, where they sat a bunch of modern thinkers around a table and asked them political questions. So I like some of the questions they ask. What if all Chinese people want a car?
Sure. If everyone had the health care, well, let me put it this way: everybody in the world cannot be afforded, not afford, but cannot be given the health care that I receive. It is solely based on first world white skin privilege. Yeah, yeah. Everybody can't drive a car. Everybody. I'm trying to think. If everybody had the access to the food that I have, I mean, there's not enough. I can't even think of what are they. These little. I can't even think what you call them. Little things like that. That give additional.
Micro.
Yeah, no, never mind.
You mean like, yeah.
It's
Anyways.
a little berry you put in
Oh, okay.
savory dishes. I'm
Yeah.
losing it. I can't remember what you call it. Go ahead. It'll pop up.
Yeah. Does our wealth depend on the third world being poor?
Of course. Yeah, and third world in this country, and yeah, the half the people in this country are either poor or near poor. The poverty standard that the Bureau of whatever rates people as poor, neither you nor I, Jerry, could live on. I mean, we could if we, but we would think we were very deprived. Yeah, I mean, there's X amount of wealth in the world, and it's distributed in how it is, and it winds up with some people being very, very, very wealthy, or nations being very, very wealthy. I mean, why is there this imaginary line along the Rio Grande River, and people on this side are middle class, and people on the other side are real poor? What?
It's a good question. Why?
Well, it's
Yeah,
about,
this
yeah, it's a distribution of wealth, distribution of
yeah,
income. So as simple
it's
as that.
actually this is one of my favorite questions I got from Rich Feldman. What questions remain unresolved for you? Or just one question. What's one question that remains unresolved for you in regards to activism?
Why don't people take more responsibility for their own agency? I'm the
Yeah,
guy with the privilege. I should be defending things as they are. I am completely affluent, which means what? I'm very wealthy? No, not at all. I'm not wealthy at all. But I have everything I want. Do I?
yeah,
Yeah, I do. I have everything I
yeah,
want and everything I need, which is unusual. The people that don't, why, when we go out, is there Rich Feldman and your sister, your wonderful sister Janice? Why do we see each other there, and why aren't we don't see each other? Because there's 20,000 people that have assembled in the suburb near us, Ferndale, to protest this or that, or to demand this or that, or even to celebrate this or
yeah.
that. I don't know.
No, that's a great one. Why don't people take the responsibility for their own agency? How would you say is a good way for someone to do that? How would they do that? Just a practical, down to earth way.
Well, I mean, this is pretty unanarchistic, but voting. I mean, if everybody
Yeah.
voted, if there was 90% turnout in this country,
Hello.
you wouldn't even hear of the Republican Party any longer. Of course, then the Democratic Party would probably become a complete racket. But but one of
No,
the
that was a
you
great
know,
answer, man.
but
I love that.
it used to. Anarchists aren't supposed to vote, but I do, and most anarchists do. It's a long, long, complicated question, but the I got three thoughts in my mind. Oh yeah, in 2004, for the Fifth Estate, I thought it was necessary to defeat George Bush because of his prosecution of this war against Iraq, totally based 100% on lies. And I said, why do I have to be doing this? Why aren't, rather than even about the war, why aren't there millions of mothers in Washington, D.C. protesting that the Bush administration rolled back the allowable amount of arsenic in drinking water that their kids are going to drink out in the West, particularly? Why aren't minors at demonstrations that we go in the
Yeah.
hundreds of thousands, and mine safety regulations have been rolled back, and on and on and on like that? So in a way, I'm their agent. I'm their agency. Uh,
Yeah.
in the same way, what I call the Greenpeace effect. The environment is going to hell, and we'll have a demonstration, and what we call the usual suspects show up. So there's about 40 people. Why aren't there 4,000 people?
Yeah.
I don't know. And neither
Yeah.
does your brother-in-law, Rich, my pal.
Yep. One more question from Problema. What does courage mean to you now?
I don't have an answer for that. I don't know. I don't know if I'm courageous. I often think, would I do what the man I mentioned earlier, the Spanish anarchist who fought against the fascists when he was 16, when he stayed in Spain after 1939, after his friends were being tortured and garroted and in prison, and he continued the fight there until it just became untenable. Would I be a radical? Would I be saying what I'm saying if I lived in Pinochet's Chile, or any dictatorship where, getting back again to the existentialism, my universal choice to rebel against a dictatorship or an authoritarian government could mean the end of my life, tortured in prison. I don't know. You don't know, and you don't know who's going to rise to it. I might go, whoa, I'm going to, say, Heil dictator. And whereas the meek person next door might become the person that has the most courage. So you don't know who has courage until you're challenged.
Yeah. I appreciate that, Peter. We got about 10 more minutes. Again, I really thank you. Tell me one major element of your political activism, your creativeness, radio, books, Fifth Estate. One major element that stayed the same for these decades and one major element that's changed.
Huh. Well, if I'm going to say nothing on the last one, I'm going to sound pretty rigid, right? Um, well, yeah, actually, a lack of the latter, less rigidity. Either you were part of the problem or you were part of the solution. The old Black Panther um, little dictum, and that meant that a lot of people are doing the best that they can. And I don't think that we can really fix the big problems through electoralism. But the people, for instance, that work to make sure that the worst people don't wind up to have power over us, and that they have the same spirit as the revolutionaries, actually. And if there was the capacity for making major changes, of which aren't even defined, and if you said, well, define those, how would what would we do tomorrow? I would be at a loss, because I don't even want to do that. I don't want to be the guy that defines it. I want to be together with you and people around me and figure that out. And what stayed the same is this simmering anger against authority over other people to their detriment.
Amazing. Fill in the blank. Anger can be a productive emotion when?
I don't think ever. Tai Chi teaches me that. It makes you rigid. You want to
Who taught you that?
Tai Chi.
Oh, Tai
Tai Chi.
It's amazing. This is how the history of my questions. I used to say, can anger be a productive emotion? And people would go yes or no. And then my friend who worked with the Black Panther, Cesar Chavez, he says, no, say anger can be a productive emotion when, and then they have to elaborate. And what you did was go back to the original question. It can't be. And I do have that happen sometimes.
Yeah, anger. I mean, we live in such an angry society. And I mean, the family of the young man killed in Memphis, just how sad they were and how,
Yeah.
and yet they asked for, a peaceful response.
Yeah.
You would think if someone killed your child, just what rage you'd have and what desire for revenge and similar punishment. In other words, you want to kill the person with your bare hands.
Yeah.
But
Moshe Feldenkrais works with healing and movement. He says it's
right.
literally possible to identify a weakness and incorporate it to become a strength rather than we're usually taught to overcome a weakness. Tell me a weakness you turned into a strength.
Bad way to end things. I don't know. I don't know if I have an answer. A weakness I've turned into a strength. No, I mean,
That's all right.
Not to say I don't have weaknesses.
No, that's all right.
But I don't know if I've ever turned them into strength.
What's the most significant difference between men and women, physical aside?
I really think that women have an innate nurturing sense, given their biological role, and some, the modern women wanting to integrate themselves into this society try to leave that aside. But we should all have that. Men, women shouldn't learn from men. Men should learn from women, and those qualities of that I mentioned are key. Once you have a sense of nurturing, you then have much more of an opportunity and an opportunity to be a peaceful person, because you can't nurture in situations of chaos or anger or well, chaos or anger at least.
Peter, you mentioned earlier you've been married for 60 years to Marilyn. How do you explain your longevity?
We were childhood sweethearts. That was it. I don't know. We just clicked. I don't know. We're certainly not the same, but we just fit in.
How do you find peace of mind?
I don't know. I should. I mean, I do meditate some, and I do Tai Chi. But one of the things you do Tai Chi a long time, you can start doing the movements, and you start thinking, oh yeah, after I'm done, I'm going to go. This is going on as you're doing the Tai Chi form. So trying to keep a mind clear is difficult. But I mean, I usually meditate. The old thing about oh, the roof's raining, or the roof's leaking because it's raining, and then the next day, oh, I don't have to fix it. The rain has stopped. So usually I start meditating when things are starting to go a little wacky. Where it's good to to shut off the mind, because I have, as a lot of and I'm immodestly saying, a lot of intellectuals do. We have a monkey mind that the Buddhists call it. It's just bam, 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 bam all the time. So and that's one of the reasons I like to play handball.
Yeah.
Because if you start thinking even about handball, if you have a cognitive process, I'm going to hit the ball into the corner because my opponent is on the right side, I'm going to hit into the left corner, you're probably going to miss it. You just have to be there and do it.
It sounds like the flyer I got when I worked for George Carlin. We got a flyer in the mail. It says, "I'm trying to get more control over my spontaneity." And it's also, Bridget Bardot goes, "I don't think when I make love." I'm like, good luck. You're doing the most sensuous thing and you want to surrender to this experience, and your brain will still like monkey minding going on. But can you forget to die?
What?
That's what a lot of people say to that question.
Yeah.
If
I
you
think,
were,
yeah,
go ahead. Yeah, no, go ahead.
Yeah. Being 82, you think, gee, how many more years, am I going to live? And I think thought of death frightened me a lot more when I was in my 40s than it does now. It's not pleasant to think of, but what are you going to do? Got to make room for the children, as the native people say. Now we got too many
that I
children.
like that. I like that
Yeah.
attitude too.
Yeah.
So here's where you anticipate a question, a quote. You create what you resist. I'm not saying you, Peter. I'm saying
Yeah.
one creates what one resists. Bob Goldthwait, the comedian, morphed it into "you are what you hate." James Joyce said, "It's a curious thing how your mind is super saturated in the religion in which you say you disbelieve." And Louis Buñuel nailed it. Thank God I'm an atheist.
Yeah.
So thank you for presaging that great quote. This is like embracing contradiction. So what's your thoughts on this? You create what you resist. Not you, Peter, but one creates what one resists. Any thoughts on that idea?
I don't know. I mean, I've heard that a lot. I mean, in Tai Chi, I mean, its principles, why it's so hard to. I mean, it's easy to get some of the basic tenets of it to, to not have the body rigid, but you actually want the body so soft almost to not be there in combat, in hand-to-hand combat. And if someone is rigidly moving towards you and you're just like that, well, you have about a 50-50 chance of going over as the other person. You can actually, and I see this more in people whose practice is way above mine, is that they can actually absorb this energy and bring it back to the person so they can't do the harm that they intended. And so I mean, resist, so you resist war, you become war, you resist racism, you become, I mean, yeah, it's one of those almost fashionable formulations to make the person go, whoa.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like my favorite is Wyndham Lewis says, "Artists live in the present and write a detailed history of the future," and that's like
Whoa.
all times are happening now. But what you described there, Peter, was like if you look in the etymology of the word jujitsu or
Yeah.
judo, um, it's art and science. How we blend art and science softly or gently. So it was amazing. You talked about this softness. Just a couple more and we're out of here. Thank you so much. What's the culture? What's the cultural shift you see developing today that inspires you?
Well, I guess, as always, mostly with older people, is seeing young people. Can you imagine, Jerry, being told that the environment is so bad that a lot of the areas we live in are not going to be habitable any longer? That we edge towards nuclear war in Eastern Europe. That the world seems filled with violence and madness. You live among your neighbors. That half of them think that Donald Trump is a good guy and have automatic weapons in their house. These young people, I was being interviewed for, this high school was interviewing seniors, and not all political. I just happened to be one of the political people, and one of them said to me, "Are you hopeful about the future?" And I looked at these beautiful young faces of these young men and women, and I thought, can I really bring myself to say no to them? Yeah, and then I looked at him again, and I said, I don't mean to sound cliched, but the hope is in you. The hope is that you won't accept what you're being given, and so yeah. So when you see young people starting to take charge of stuff, and women too, let's not forget the women.
Yeah.
The men have done a terrible job so far, and there's some pretty bad women out there too. But most women, driven by this sense of nurturing for the future, for the planet, for themselves, are the hope, I'd say.
Yeah. Two more and we're out of here, Peter. Thank you. This is Thornton Wilder in 1928. Art is confession. Art is the secret told. But art is not only the desire to tell one's secret, it's the desire to tell it and hide it at the same time. You've laid your cards on the table for over 90 minutes. I'm not insinuating you haven't already answered this.
Right.
What's
Yeah.
it really all about for you?
I don't know. I've done everything for somebody who's been investigated by the police and the FBI for being too radical. Everything in my life is pretty conservative. I worked at the same job for 50 years and married the same woman for 60 years. We lived in the same house for almost 40 years. So I've found a niche that I think is personally fulfilling. I can say it, fulfilling, and also one that realizes my obligations, my responsibility to the community, to the world, to the environment.
Yeah,
And I guess I'm satisfied for the remaining years of my life repeating what I've done so far.
it's beautiful.
Can,
What gives you the most? Oh, go ahead.
oh, I thought the last question was be how do we get your book and how do we subscribe to the Fifth Estate?
Well, you could definitely say that now, and then I'll ask the last question. Go
Which
ahead.
no, good. I'm sorry, that was terrible. Tell me,
Well,
ask
no,
your last.
no, we can get your book, Summer of Fire. How can people get it? By going to where?
Yeah, well, here it's Summer on Fire, a Detroit novel, and you can just go to Peter Werbe. Oh, there's my name on the screen. Just peterwerbe.com or .org. It's essentially a memoir of six weeks in the summer of 1967 in Detroit, and it follows a fictionalized version of the Fifth Estate staff during all sorts of things, everything from rock and roll and drugs at the Grandie to anti-war demonstrations, the Detroit riots, a big part of it, and then off to a location out of the city where there's a bomb plot and Wilhelm Reich plays a role. And also the book it's a memoir, it's fiction, but it has online footnotes that are to make clearer the historical footnotes, and it also has a 70 song soundtrack because so many different musical groups are mentioned in the book. Fifth Estate, fifthestate.org.
It's both great. I do recommend people going to your website too. It's in
Did you get
totally.
a book? Did I send you a book?
No, but you can. It's
I will.
the important thing is that people can go right to the link below when this is on YouTube, and they can go right to your website and read some of your those footnote listings are amazing. It's really deep history
Oh,
of Detroit and activism and music. And Peter, what gives you the most optimism?
well, that just goes back to the last question. That would be young people and women,
Yeah,
them in motion. And, one of the things, it occurs to me that when we were activists, beginning with large demonstrations in 1964, 1965, into the late 60s and 70s, we were really driven by a lot of anger. And there was a lot of things to be angry at. I mean, that kind of may contradict a little what I said earlier, but we were angry about the war. We were angry about civil rights. We were angry about what was happening to women and gays. But now, when I see women out in demonstrations, when I see a lot of young people, there's a lot of joy there. They, I mean, I remember there were these demonstrations that were happening day after day when the Supreme Court it said that the repeal Roe v. Wade, and you would think there would just be all these angry women. Well, they were pretty, but every once in a while they would break out in these chants or songs, and it was, and I just felt like an old white man just sitting there just smiling at them, And I was so happy that to see them.
it
Can I
is
tell you?
inspiring.
Can I tell you one thing?
Yeah.
If you would have told me in advance you were going to ask me the questions you were for an hour and a half, I would have said, Jerry, I'm not going to do it. I don't. This has been so good. You
Oh,
are such a good interviewer and have such command of literature and knowledge, and drew so many things out of me. Usually, I want to go on shows and I like talking about my book, but I've done it so many times, and I thought I was going to wind up giving the same rote answers and maybe read from my book, which I've done, a dozen times and all that. But this made me think about myself. I'm going to think, what about those questions I couldn't answer? Maybe I got to go back and think about those. So I want to thank you. This has
well,
been a wonderful experience.
I thank you so much. I want to just conclude on a couple things. That's when I say what gives you the most optimism, that is the answer that I get the most is young people and youth.
Yeah.
And that's encouraging. And, the first question is, what is the best thing for a human being? Guess what? I got that question from someone who studied Wilhelm Reich, and he says the best thing for a human being is another human being.
Yeah.
You said community right off the bat. That's what you've
Sure.
stressed. And then the last question is, what gives you the most optimism? I got that from what they asked Groucho Marx at the end of his life. And he said, other people.
Huh.
So it is that, we exist. I just have to ask you, where did you get this sense of community? More from the way your parents raised you or more on your own?
Well, I think it was a combination. I mean, they were lefties, particularly my mother, oddly enough. Usually it's the man, and in that generation way back. And I can tell I'm starting to get into my Godfather voice after a while. um, that, but as soon as I began political activity, that was all about community, and through that, and through the Fifth Estate, I've just met the most interesting people I could imagine, and I would add you now to this list.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. And again, great thanks to Janice and Rich for, I think we've met in the past at Jan's house, but it was really It was really fun, Peter, and I thank you so much. And even though I'm going to hit the end broadcast button, I hope this conversation never ends and we can keep talking forever and ever.
Thank you, Jerry. It was great.
Thank you so much, Peter.